Oh, well, this is my last summer service from behind the chair. Later this week, I go to the seminary in Ohio, and I get back basically just before the ice cream social, which will be my first year anniversary of attendance. There we go. My computer, unbeknownst to you because of the disconnection from the speakers, decided it wanted to keep going without me. Right. Shall we have the chalice lighting, a volunteer to come up and light as we speak? Thank you. May the light we now kindle inspire us to use our powers to heal and not to harm, to help and not to hinder, to bless and not to curse, to serve you, Spirit of freedom. Well, we have joys and sorrows, I'm sure. I will start off with my joy. I got my home cleaned in time for passing my annual inspection, and then had the cleaners come back and do more of a spring cleaning on top of that. And so a good chunk of my apartment looks really nice right now. My sorrow is that I couldn't do the whole thing, but there were some objects, some boxes and things that are still not unpacked from when I first moved in that need to be taken care of before cleaners can finish the room that they're in. But once that is done, I'm going to get some furniture, and then I'll be ready for my emotional support kitty. So, very, very much looking forward to that. Does anyone else have some joys or concerns that they'd like to come up with? It came off entirely. Ah, I see it. Not easy to get from this position, but just the spongy little thing. Okay, so would anyone like to come up and take that microphone and share any joys or sorrows from this past week?
I don't really have anything other than, today's my brother's birthday. He's Johnny. He's been here before, but he's 64 today. Yep, and I turn 65 tomorrow. Actually, correction, I'm 65 now, 66.
I understand that every once in a while, when a birthday's coming up, I have to stop and think and count and do the math and go, nope, not 26.
Hi, I've had a busy summer and I'm grateful for that. Yesterday we were at a steam show in Canandaigua and we got a new pool. It's like 42 inches, 10 by 16, so it's nice for days like this where you can just stay out in the pool.
Oh, you can drop the old one off in my backyard.
And Speaking of birthdays, it just reminded me, my birthday's coming up on Wednesday, and I will be grateful to not be 41 because it's a prime number and I just don't like it. Like, I like 42 because it's like 6 and 7. It's like all divisible. So on Wednesday, I'll be 42.
That reminds me, any number whose digits add up to a number divisible by 3 is itself completely evenly divisible by 3. Now think about it. 24, 6, 27, 9, and so forth. Even if you get a big number like 1,337, if that, I didn't calculate ahead to see, but if those added up to a number that's divisible by 3, then the whole number is. So you're divisible by 3. All right. Today, we're reviewing the first modern day Unitarians, a few of whom were also Universalists. First, I have to get my computer to agree with me to open up. Okay, that looks good. There we go. All right, now, keep in mind, again, that these are modern day Unitarians. We had earlier groups, the ancient Unitarians, that were called Arians. And that name, because it was considered by the Orthodox to be a heresy, was applied to anybody else who was not Trinitarian in the future. And so they do come up in this modern period, but it's not the same group and they're not linearly connected by a succession of people back to that time. Instead, it's just the throwing the name at people as a way to disparage them. So among these, we have the Socinians, the Polish Brethren, and the Unitarian Church of Transylvania. The first group of these, the Socinians, were named after not exactly their founders, just like the Mennonites were named after Menno Simons, but it was over 100 years after they'd been founded. The Socinians had already sprung up before they got the name from two prominent followers of the doctrine who became leaders of the movement. All right, the Socinians developed out of the radical or left wing of the Reformation and have their roots in the Italian Anabaptist movement. Those of you who attended my classes on the Amish know that the Radical Reformation primarily consisted of Anabaptist groups who were named because they rejected infant baptism. And therefore, if they themselves believed in baptism, they had themselves rebaptized as believing adults. And that fell under the name of the heresy known as Anabaptism or rebaptism, because you were only supposed to be baptized once under Holy Roman law. Now, the Anabaptists, of course, considered they were being baptized for the first time because doing it for babies had no effect and therefore didn't even matter. Some people called Anabaptists were technically Catabaptists. Catabaptists means people who didn't believe in water baptism at all. They might believe in a spiritual baptism, or they might believe in no baptism, but they didn't believe in a physical ordinance involving the use of either still or running water. The Anti-Trinitarian Council of Venice in 1550, Venice, Italy, was held with the first of the major anti-Trinitarian leaders to go beyond the ancient Arian beliefs and deny the pre-existence of Christ. This leader was named Lelio Sozzini, or Socinius in Latin. And the Italian branch of the movement ended up getting their name from him and from his nephew. Among the beliefs that they held were that Jesus was not pre-existing incarnation as a human being, because the Logos, or Word, referred to in John 1:1, was actually a reference to the new creation in 1 John 1:1, the new creation in Christ, and not referring to the creation of the entire universe, reflecting Genesis 1:1. Of course, to Orthodox groups such as the Orthodox, Catholics, and practically all other Protestants, this was an extreme heresy, because Jesus existed before the universe was created, since he was always God. Socinius' nephew, Fausto Sozzini, or if you will, Faustus Socinius, elaborated on his uncle's doctrines, and many years after his uncle's death in Switzerland, Fausto was consulted by the Unitarian Church in Transylvania when they were trying to resolve an internal dispute. And he moved to Transylvania, where he actually married one of the Transylvanian Unitarians. But for reasons that I may remember to mention later, he was denied membership in that Transylvanian group, even though they admired him and brought him in to help them. All right, so he moved eventually to Poland. I actually screwed up the name of the church there for a moment, because he was brought in to help the Transylvanians. But then the church he actually moved to that wouldn't admit him, where he married a member, was the Polish Brethren. And this means that the nephew of the main leader of the Italian Socinians had ties to both of the other groups. And I apologize for doing that. When you're juggling three groups in the air, and you're the only one who can see the bowling pins that you're juggling, it gets easy to mix them up a little bit. The term Socinian eventually started to be used in the Dutch Republic and then spread to the Kingdom of England from about the early 1600s. And Latin publications by the Socinians circulated among the English-speaking Presbyterian Protestants, including Arminians, Remonstrants, dissenters, such as the eventual Congregationalists and Baptists, and also the earliest of the English Unitarians tended to use the term Socinian to refer to the European groups. The Socinians themselves eventually decided that they would much rather be called Brethren or Christians. And long after there were only scattered remnants from Poland and Italy in other countries because they had been expelled under persecution, they chose the preferred name Unitarian, which was a direct imitation of the church in Transylvania, which, by the way, still exists to this day. They were not exterminated. Now, as I've hinted at already, in Great Britain and North America, Socinianism became a catch-all term for any kind of dissenting belief, primarily anti-Trinitarian, bless you, but eventually it became an alternative term for Anabaptists, the name you gave to anybody who was neither Catholic nor your standard expected everyday Protestant. Socinians had some very specific theology, which were eventually summarized by the Polish brethren that we're still going to get to, in what was called the Rakovian Catechism. It rejected Orthodox Christian theology about God's knowledge, saying that God only had foreknowledge of definite events in the future. He did not know about possible events in the future. So if there were events that were contingent on other events, and people could use their free will to affect that outcome, God could not see ahead of time how that was going to turn out, which also meant that God had foreknowledge of the elect, but not who was going to be among them. Instead, he knew that the elect were going to be saved and they were going to go to heaven, but he didn't know in advance which people were going to be among them. They also rejected foreknowledge of hell by basically throwing out hell. And that is what made many of them universalists. They rejected the doctrine of the Trinity, the deity or divinity of Christ, and rejected a view of the atonement that Jesus took people's place on the cross for their sins. So you can see that the mainstream Protestant view on predestination and the overall Christian view among all of the Orthodox groups on God's omniscience differed significantly with the Socinians. They also tended to be conscientious objectors to war, like the other Anabaptists, and later writers ascribed a sense of skepticism to the Socinians, that they were skeptical of miracles, including the virgin birth, and expected anything that you would believe in religion needed to be proved by the scriptures. Now, I mentioned that the younger of the two men named Socinius, the nephew, Fausto, was requested to go to the Unitarian Church of Transylvania to resolve a dispute, and then ended up moving to the Polish Brethren, where he ended up trying unsuccessfully to join, but was admired by the members who did publish his writings in their press and consulted him on the catechism that they were putting together about their teachings. And he married one of their members. Okay. So, the Polish Brethren. They were also called the Minor Reformed Church of Poland because they withdrew from the main Reformed or Calvinist Church of Poland when one of their leaders, began to speak out against the doctrine of the Trinity during a general synod of the Calvinist churches of the Polish kingdom. If you ever are looking up early Reformation theology and you hear the term or read the term Ecclesia Minor, that's simply the Latin term for minor church, which was their common name until their doctrines became widely spread. At that point, they started being called Socinians, and they were also called Arians after the ancient heretical group. A split developed in the 1570s, just 2 decades after the Polish Brethren had formed and withdrawn from the main Calvinistic church, between a pacifist group and the non-pacifist group. The main group were conscientious objectors to war, like most other Anabaptists, including today's Amish and Mennonites, and thereby also refused to hold public office, and were opposed to capital punishment. The reason that Fausto Sozzini was refused membership was because he was a Catabaptist. He agreed with them on virtually all other doctrines, except he rejected water baptism, which they practiced, and that kept him from being admitted, since the way to become a member is you're baptized with water. The two main centers for the Polish Brethren were the cities of Pinchov and Raków, and it was in the city of Raków, the main site, that the Polish Brethren opened their printing press and a university, the Rakowian Academy, which trained over 1,000 students. The Polish Brethren never participated in the agreement made among the different Polish Protestants in 1570. They were excluded. So the minor church in Poland was outside the officially recognized Protestantism. All the Lutherans, all the Calvinists that were in Poland united together, not in doctrine or practice, not in even pulpit recognition among each other, but reached an agreement on how they would deal with each other and the Catholics. Poor Polish brethren, ignored. There were 3 directions that the Polish Brethren relocated when in 1658 they were officially expelled by the Duchy of Prussia, to the Duchy of Prussia, to Holland, and to England. This is because, as Protestants in Poland, they were assumed to be collaborators with the Swedish invaders to the north, who kept coming in and trying to take over Poland in order to make it Protestant. These were false accusations because, again, the Polish Brethren believed in the separation of church and state, which is why they wouldn't hold office and they would not go to war. The Polish Brethren were never large in number. They were larger than the Socinians back in Italy, but they never became a significant impact on theological thought in Poland. But as I say, they did form an influence in Prussia, which is that section of Germany, today occupied by Poland, but which was not Polish at that time. It was on the eastern shore of the North Sea, between what is now Lithuania and Poland, that little pocket that Russia and Poland split after the Nazis were defeated. And then in Holland and England. In England, their writings, the Rakovian Catechism and writings by Socinius and by various Polish brethren writers, came into the hands of John Locke, Sir Isaac Newton, an Englishman named John Biddle, who formed one of the first English Unitarian churches, and Joseph Priestley, who migrated to North America and there opened a church, if memory serves, it was in Philadelphia, where Thomas Jefferson occasionally attended. Today, there are no Polish Brethren churches in Poland, and to the best we can tell, no descendants of the Polish Brethren. This brings us to the third group. And by the way, I just realized how slowly and carefully I'm saying everything, and it's reminding me of 2 or 3 infamous or famous comedy films making fun of teachers and the people falling asleep in the seats as they're trying to hold attention. Bueller. Bueller. All right, now we come to the church that had Unitarian in its official name and its practical use as a name by its neighbors. The Unitarian Church of Transylvania, which is also known as the Hungarian Unitarian Church. Now that's explicable by the fact that what later became the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the portion of it that was Hungary, was in control of what is now Romania. So when we think of Transylvania now, we either think of Romania or Dracula, but either way, they're under separate administration than they were in the 15 and 1600s. So they were kind of interchangeable. Today, the Hungarian Unitarian Church, or Unitarian Church of Transylvania, is primarily Hungarian speaking by language. And it was even when it was originally founded in Transylvania. Again, because the government was Hungarian, Hungarians felt free to move anywhere that the Hungarian government was in charge. They felt comfortable, even if most of their neighbors spoke Romanian or German or something else. Today, the Hungarian Unitarian Church makes up an entire 1/3 of 1% of the church members in Hungary. So, huge church. And they've had 125 parishes since the 1800s. They still maintain all of those parishes. And with that whopping 1/3 of 1% population in the country, you can imagine some of them are probably even bigger than we are. I mean, us here in Niagara Falls. They have been and remain the only Unitarian church in the world that did not adopt congregational polity. So To this day, they have a bishop. And then the bishop has an assistant, I believe he's named the curate. And then under them are roughly a dozen archpriests, each in charge of a certain number of those individual parishes, each of which then has either its own priest or shares a few if it's too small to support one anymore. There are a couple of Unitarian churches that waver from congregational polity, including a non-subscribing Presbyterian Church of Ireland. So there is a Unitarian church in Ireland that governs itself with a body of presbyters. Not congregational, but not Episcopal either. Unlike the Polish Brethren, today the Calvinist Reformed Church and two competing Lutheran churches, together with the Hungarian Unitarians, operate a Presbyterian Theological Institute, each of which has its denomination represented by a section, so that they have their own faculty and their own students. But they share facilities, common library, and so forth. So the only Unitarian theological seminary that I know of in Europe is shared with those three Protestant churches. A little ecumenical. "41% of the professing Christians," I'm saying that wrong again. How many times am I going to flub up here with this microphone? 41% of the population of today's Romania are Roman Catholic. 1/3 of 1% of today's Romanians are Hungarian-speaking Unitarians. And in between, 47% are Reformed. And then a much smaller group are split up among those Lutherans. So you may have heard the expression, if you visit somebody in the South and they're neither a Baptist nor a Methodist, somebody's been messing with their religion. If you go to Romania and you find somebody that is neither Reformed, Calvinist, or Roman Catholic, somebody's probably been messing with their religion. But not if they say Unitarian. That means they're descendants of the Unitarians from the 1500s and 1600s, because you can pretty well guess they're not making converts today. The Transylvania diet, which is not a good way to lose weight, but is their version of a parliament or Congress, officially recognized the Unitarian Church, which is why it still exists to this day. It was granted toleration under the Unitarian Prince of Romania. Well, that would explain that. There was a union of Transylvania with Romania at the end of World War I, and that's how it becomes so confusing me to go back and forth between Hungarian and Romanian in discussing the church and its members. Little over 100 years now, Transylvania had been transferred from the Hungarian Empire to the Kingdom of Romania. I believe today Romania is a republic. In any case, it still has that territory. A Catholic church built as part of a 13th century fort, which then reformed itself as Unitarian, is on UNESCO's World Heritage Site. So it is probably the most beautiful, prominent, and historical site for Unitarians in Romania if you ever choose to go there on a visit. Now, if we look at these three groups together, we see some lasting influence, but mostly through a chain. There's very little direct influence on American Unitarians, but they do represent the first people in modern times, since the end of the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, to adopt beliefs that 150 years ago to 200 years ago, American Unitarians would recognize as their own. Of course, today, most Unitarians aren't Unitarian, just as most Universalists are not Universalists. Because most Unitarians don't believe that God is one. They believe God is none. Although we have a big chunk of Christian Unitarians, and we have Wiccan Unitarians, pagan Unitarians, other nature-worshiping Unitarians, and Unitarians who would also describe themselves as Jewish and so on. But on the whole, a majority of Unitarians, but I'm not sure by how large of a percentage, are humanists. And Universalists, up until shortly before they merged with Unitarians here, were Trinitarians. They didn't reject the Trinity, they just rejected hell. And today, most Unitarians still reject hell, so they're, Universalists, so they are still Universalists, but they probably reject salvation also. And they may reject an afterlife. So, now, our terms keep getting redefined over and over across decades and centuries. The later Socinians didn't believe exactly like the initial Socinians, and their influence pretty much was limited to Italy and Switzerland, except for the envoy that they sent to Transylvania and then on to Poland. But their original writings had a significant influence on the Polish Brethren. The Polish Brethren had an influence on the Transylvanians. Then the Polish Brethren were exiled, and most fled to Germany and to Holland, and then on to England. While again, the Hungarians now in Romania remain to this day where they are. There were a number of Englishmen I mentioned who received written materials, mostly in Latin, not Hungarian, not Italian, not Romanian, but Latin, the scholarly language of the Reformation, that seeded the English Unitarians. And then we have that one English Unitarian come to the American colonies and founded a church. Benjamin Franklin attended, and Thomas Jefferson attended, and it partially may have influenced him in creating the Jefferson Bible when he more strongly solidified his deist beliefs against miracles and the supernatural, And he went through the New Testament and snipped out all the miracles and cut and pasted what was left, and it came to be known as the Jefferson Bible. So there is some influence there. But as we'll find out in a future, and I hope more exciting talk, maybe I'll have pictures for you. The American Unitarians were mostly, but not entirely, independent of the English Unitarians. So we have 3 stages. The Arians in the ancient Roman Empire, the Socinians and related groups in Europe, and then the mostly initially separate English and colonial Unitarians. Universalists independently sprang up in the American colonies after independence, and American Unitarians had an outsized influence, much more so than the English Unitarians, in spreading Unitarianism around the world. But as far as Unitarian Universalists, one group comprised of both former separate groups, it's almost entirely a US phenomenon. And we kind of spilled over a little bit into Canada with that union. And then we have a handful of churches around the world who associate with the UUA or with splinter groups from the UUA because they believe that the Unitarians and Universalists today are close enough to be completely joined together. That was today's tantalizing, exciting lecture on the first modern day Unitarians. Before we extinguish the chalice and I play one last piece of music, do we have any announcements to perk things up further?
No, I don't have any announcements, but I did want to mention next week, I believe is Meg. I think yours on gratitude. Gratitude and practice next week.
All right, now, raise your hand. I won't be offended. Raise your hand if you found it difficult to even pay attention. Oh, good. Now, raise your hand if you found it difficult to stay awake. All right, now, I may feel there's a little fibbing here, but raise your hand if this was interesting. Okay, good, good. All right, well, as I already promised, and probably with some pretty pictures, sometime in the future, I will cover the origins of Unitarians in America, but we've had other speakers that have done aspects of that before. I will also think I can have a lot of fun with the ancient heretics. Yeah, because the Arians, the Unitarians of their time, were simply outvoted at the Council of Nicaea. They were the majority of Christians at that time in the Roman Empire, but the emperor, who was against their beliefs, stacked the deck on which bishops were chosen to come to his imperial council and settle official doctrines of what became the Catholic Church. And I have a single announcement myself, which is another request for a brief ride to the pharmacy to pick up refills that are waiting for me. Do I have a volunteer? Yeah, thank you. Now, I need Erica to tell me if I've got the TV functioning again. Right, I attempted to turn it back on. Oh, I hope I didn't just turn it back off again while waiting for it. And this is the right one. Okay, here we go. All right, all set. Now, shall we extinguish the chalice? When was the last time you had a speaker with such low self-esteem that they did a poll? All right. We extinguish this chalice, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.